Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show. This week, the very thorny topic, love, or maybe not love, that decision to move in together, and what are the implications for you personally, financially? How do you go about doing it? How do you make sure if things go wrong that your assets are protected? Certainly an area that we can't advise on in terms of love, but certainly in terms of managing your money is our cup of tea. So make sure you take plenty of notes on the way through, get past the cynicism and go into this with your eyes open. Enjoy the show. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show with me, your host, Andrew Baxter, and as always, my faithful companion, Mr. Mitchell Laurential.
Thanks for having me on the show, Mr. Baxter. Absolute pleasure to be here, and we're covering a fairly interesting topic, especially one that's probably important now given there's an economic crisis going on, and that is moving in with your loved one and money. Plenty of things to explore.
They're opposite ends of the scale. I guess we're going to talk about one thing from an emotional perspective and the other from the hard-nosed world of money and investing, I guess, which is something of a juxtaposition, so it'll be very interesting to see where we go with this.
I think we'll get a fair bit of feedback through our Facebook because we're not here to be lovey-dovey, mushy-washy. We're here to be hard-nosed, talk about the money, the fatal flaws, the considerations, all the important stuff.
Indeed. Well, I guess a good place to start is when it comes time to bite that bullet, that decision that people make to move in together. And what's the rationale for that if we really think about it? And oftentimes, you may well be moving in together because you love each other and you've got a plan for a future together, and I guess it's a try before you buy without being too cynical. But the other side is obviously economic. You're thinking about paying, think about the cost of living these days is pretty brutal out there. That ability to have one less lot of rent, you're staying over maybe 2 or 3 nights a week. So
what's the difference?
Yeah, why don't we just move in together? Groceries consolidated, electric consolidated, and all the.
You can share your Netflix
stuff.
Subscription.
You can share your Netflix subscription. Not great for the share price, but certainly good for your bottom line, that's for sure. Those economic reasons can often drive people into wanting to do that. And look, if there's a saving that you're making along the way, I guess it then frees up some money to do other things with, and I guess we'll explore some of the do's and don'ts as we get into there. But the economic reason, moving together, it's cheaper. 2 people can live cheaper than 2 people living separately.
What particularly would you recommend, say, splitting up? I mean, there's a couple of considerations like bank accounts and things like that, which we'll touch on next. But for the minute, what would you suggest sharing and splitting up and keeping separate?
Look, that's a big question, isn't it? And if you're sort of starting on a relationship with somebody and it is a try before you buy, how deep do you really want to go? I mean, are you like pooling all your assets, your super and everything like that, or are you just gradually going into this? And we'd certainly encourage the gradually going into this rather than going all in. And look, this again brings up something of a conflict. If you think about where we stand as traders, before we get into a trade, we're always looking at the exit strategy. How are we going to get out of this if it works perfectly, or how are we going to get out of this if it doesn't work? So I guess that's the set of lenses through our DNA that we kind of use. When you apply that to a relationship, it's a little more challenging, and that is, how can you commit to moving in with someone or moving forward in a relationship if half your attention is focused on how do I get out of this if it doesn't work?
Well, it's really, really cold and it's pretty hard-nosed to think about that, but ultimately, for the sake of your money, sometimes having an exit plan can set you up and save you a lot of money.
Yep.
Needless to say, the whole the legal fees and whatnot that go with breakups and all of those things. So to combat that, let's talk about maybe there's some of the considerations to factor in before you actually move in with someone.
So, if you're moving in with someone, some of the things to sort of consider, are you getting a new place together? Are you moving into the other party's premise? Are they moving into yours? Are you renting? Do you own? And these are really, really important factors to take into consideration as you get started on this. So, if you think about if you're going to go and rent somewhere, are you renting somewhere together? In which case, whose name is going on the lease? And that's a huge one. Particularly, there's going to be a bond involved. Whose money is being used for the bond? If you've got past those fundamental steps, say, no, we're going all in, we're doing it together. Okay, that's cool. You put the money in together, you're all good. What about the utilities? Whose name are they in? And things like that. And I know this sounds really tedious, but it's so important to get this right on the front end. Because if things do go south, who gets booted out of the apartment or the house? Who gets to stay? Who's on the hook for the bond? Let's just say that you're the party that gets moved out. The other party stays there and they turn the place into a meth lab, and the landlord's now coming after you for your share of the bond plus the damages that are done. It can get quite messy. Things you don't want to think about when you're looking through the rose-coloured glasses of we're in love, let's live together, or in lust more likely, but nonetheless, we're at that stage. You've got to think these things through before you get to the other end.
Well, I think a lot of people have that unrealistic depiction of what it's like to be moving in. I mean, are you curling up on the couch every night watching Netflix, or are you getting serious about really advancing your relationship? I think there's the lust and then there's also the love component. But just considering this for 1 second, is having that chat with your partner about, what happens if, who gets what if, is that going to put more stress on your relationship?
Look, I guess it depends on the type of relationship you have, and I guess my view on that is kind of jaded in a way. My wife was a divorce lawyer; she was a partner in a law firm.
You poor thing.
And so I went in eyes open as to exactly what I was getting involved with, and I think it is important to have that kind of conversation. But any good relationship is based on being able to talk about the hard stuff. As well as all the fun stuff. It's not just where we're going for dinner on the weekend. Let's talk about some of the nitty-gritty stuff too.
Sure.
So going back to the mechanics, setting up a household account is probably a pretty good idea where both parties can contribute to it. Again, do you contribute equally? Is it based on your income and so on? And these are the sorts of things that you really want to talk about on the way in, so that it becomes easy once you're in. You can just enjoy the experience. But also, if you have to extricate yourself from there are some parameters and precedents, I suppose, that have been set in terms of who pays for what.
And just a question on that: how do you come to an agreement on that? Because I might say I want to put in X dollars, and you might say I want to put in X dollars. You should do this. If you don't agree on something, how do you find a solution?
I guess you've just got to talk it out, and if you can't agree on that stuff, it doesn't really bode too well for your relationship going forward, does it?
Probably right.
You've got to get past those minor hurdles. So, let's say you've got through all that, and the one proviso on this we haven't talked about is if one party owns a house,
sure,
and the other person is moving in, and we'll talk a bit about that as we get further on through in terms of your exit strategy if it goes wrong. So, what are you going to do with the money that you've saved?
I guess that's the next question. I mean, there's plenty of places to put it. Do you go out for dinner, an extra night a week? Do you go to the movies, or do you maybe get smart and invest it?
Well, again, that opens up a whole corridor of doors, and I don't know, this is probably going to be a 5-year podcast rather than a 5-minute one. But if you're saving money collectively as a household, what are you going to do with that? And you're quite right. Do we spend it on a higher quality of living or perceived quality of living? Different restaurants, buy some different clothes. Heaven forbid you buy the couple's car. I think that's the...
What kind of car is a couple's car? That's something I haven't heard before.
Don't get me started on this. So couple's car is an interesting one. You have in mind what you want, the other party have in mind what they want, and neither of you can agree, so you end up buying the thing in the middle that doesn't really suit either of you.
So if you wanted a Ferrari and I wanted a Bentley, what do you get in that stage?
Look, in that case, and if it's a couple's car, you probably end up with the Volkswagen Beetle or something like that. But that's something that's a compromise that you see. Are you going to go on a holiday overseas? In which case, you're going to bust through some of the money that you're saving. So I guess it's important to step back and go, okay, are you moving in to save money, or are you moving in to progress your relationship? And if it's to save money, why are you saving the money, and what are you going to do with it in a positive way, rather than just simply funneling it into lifestyle?
Sure. And I think that's a really important notion to understand. So segueing that now into some of the mistakes that people make. Yes, they may have some extra cash on the side. They're feeling awfully confident about themselves given their partner's pumping their tires up through the week. What are some of the fatal flaws and pitfalls that we find when couples initially move in together?
Okay, well, I mean, everything's hunky-dory while it's going well, just like anything. It's what happens on the exit, the breakup, which is really where the challenges come. And take for example, if you've been in a longer term relationship, and there's a lot of myths out there about what constitutes a de facto relationship, for example. A de facto is a legal term. It's where you're in a committed relationship that's public, that's sexual, and is run for a duration. And people say it's 2 years. That's not hard and fast, but let's take that as a ballpark figure. And we're sort of bleeding into the area of family law, and I know we've got a couple of family law experts that are going to be coming in and talking on our podcast in the next few weeks, which is pretty exciting.
It's exciting.
But we're getting into their area of expertise. But let's say you've been together for a couple of years and then you break up. There may be an obligation of spousal maintenance. If there are children involved, there's going to be maintenance for the children. There may be a claim against your assets. So if one party has gone in with substantially more assets than the other, the way the court might rule out on a breakup is that, okay, well, you've been together for a couple of years, you're in a real relationship, they may have a claim on your super, for example, or a property if you own it. So these are things to really consider and be very, very minded of. Are you tenants in kind, or living together?
And I know a lot of people talk about prenups, which I know you have said to me previously, it's kind of not worth the paper it's printed on. Are there any ways to protect yourself and your assets in that situation?
It does become very, very difficult. Maybe if you've got a trust structure, for example, they can be used in certain cases. A bloodline trust is a way of asset protection over multiple generations, which is bloodline, passes down through the bloodline,
sure,
as opposed to by marriage. But that's a bigger picture in terms of asset protection. If we're just talking about John and Joanne Bag of Donuts that have moved in together, so that's a fairly big undertaking to take before you go and rent your one bedder in Bondi Junction, So, you've kind of got to put this in the context of the commitment level that you're making in. But, if you do break up, having a binding financial agreement is something that may be important. We've split up and, we're done, and you get the couch and the TV, and I'm going to keep the apartment, and you can get, Cuddles the, Maltese Shih Tzu cross or whatever it is.
I actually, funnily enough, just a personal anecdote, had a good friend of mine, she's a girl, and I won't mention her name, just broken up with her boyfriend, the whole messy situation, who gets what, and she was most upset the fact that he could have whatever he wanted, just don't take the coffee machine. And I think it gets to that point where, all you want is a coffee machine, but, there's those sentimental gifts that maybe one person bought the other, but it's yours. I mean, how does that kind of work?
It does start to get very muddy, and having some clear definition before you go in. That's why I think, setting up, dare I say it, a more commercial relationship where you have a joint account that you both pay your dough into, that the rent comes out of and the bills get paid for, shows the fact that you are both contributing to it, and you've put in what you have and you're walking away with what you've put in, as opposed to a claim where someone's been supported and maybe you find yourself in a position where you're quite vulnerable. It must be a pretty good coffee machine.
Well, just one question. I mean, can you trust your partner too much? That's, probably a mistake on my part that I've made in other relationships. We all have in times before. Where you trust them so much where it almost becomes willy-nilly when it comes to money and things like that. And then that can probably come back to bite you later on.
Look, that's a pretty loaded question, and it's
massive.
It's a pretty cynical one. I think at some point in time, if you're with someone, you have to trust them. And if you're in a deeper relationship where you've got children, for example, the mother or father of your kids, that's a lifetime commitment.
Sure.
So arguing about money when you've got a lifetime commitment with your children, kind of puts it into context. That serious stuff. Money doesn't add up to a hill of beans by comparison to that side of things. So I guess rewinding that somewhat and trying to reframe it. Can you trust someone too much? Can you trust yourself too much sometimes? They're all sort of philosophical questions, but at some point in time you've got to make a commitment. So you're better off doing your work on the front end in your interviewing and screening process, just like finding a trade, to make sure that the person that you're with meets the criteria that you're really looking for. And talking about, okay, well, if this doesn't work, what are we going to do?
Maybe we should change this to Mitch and Andrew's relationship advice broadcast instead of money and investing.
Yeah, there are a lot of different chapters to that one. A few different chapters, but at some point in time, if you're in a committed relationship, you're in a committed relationship.
Sure.
And, that's a heavy thing to get into, and we might keep that for our family lawyer when they come in and talk to us about that.
It's exciting.
The bottom line is be aware of asset protection, particularly if one of you is going in asset heavy and the other one isn't. It's massively, massively important to get that taken care of, and we can put you in the right direction of people that can assist in that. If you're not really going in with that much in the way of assets, it's kind of an ambit point. But
Sure.
If one of you is substantially better off financially, then it's probably something that you do want to have a look at, lest you find yourself on the wrong end of a maintenance claim, and that's not gender based. And the rules, it's a really fluid area. Family law is very tricky, and it's and it's irrespective of gender now. Now we're in where the legal system is caught up with society, and we've got same-sex relationships and things like that. It really is a very, very messy area to get into. So you're better off getting it laid out properly up front. But contribute together into a shared account and run the expenses if it's a rental. If you already own, then you have a pretty good idea on what you're going to do if things go wrong.
Sure. Okay, well, we are coming to the end of the broadcast, AB. So to finish this on a more positive note, let's just take the case study that you're with someone, you're really building a really positive relationship, everything's happy, you're saving. What do you start to do with your money together, given you've got that extra?
Well, again, if it's a joint account and you're saving money together, then I think your investments should be in that space too. And that's relatively easy if they're cash assets like stocks and shares, which is our space, or other more liquid things. But if you're buying an investment property together, that does become rather tricky if things go wrong again. So, it will be guided by the type of asset that you're in. But if you have long-term plans together and you're planning on staying together and you're saving together, then buying those assets in joint names is one way of doing it. Alternatively, you can buy them on trust in a trust structure, and you're both shareholders of that trust, and if it goes wrong, you can keep the asset and pay the other party out.
Sure.
And again, that's an area that you probably want to get some advice on if you're going into it at that stage. Again, you're moving into your one better to try and save $100 a week. Going through asset protection and structuring is beyond probably where you need to be. But if you're coming in from the other end of the equation, and again, particularly if it's a second marriage, for example, or something in that sort of space, it can be really tricky.
I think two brains are better than one. So if you can get that equation right, then obviously, all the more power to you, because, you combine finances and you've got all the more firepower to do some good.
The key message, I think, more than anything, Mitch, is be very aware of what you're getting involved in. And things can creep up on you. So, I've been living together for a couple of years, it's all going pretty well, then it goes wrong. All of a sudden, there's a claim against your assets. You're super, you got to pay maintenance. And again, if there are children involved, that's a different matter. And again, that's outside of the money and investing space. If you've elected to have children together, that's a lifelong commitment. So step up and strap a set on. If you've gone in that space, you're going to have to go with what you've done there. You can't have the fun without the bill at the end of it, so to speak. And the bottom line is, if you've chosen to have kids together, expect to be on the receiving end of having to support them if you choose to split up, and that's your obligation as a parent. And it's something I believe in wholeheartedly.
Me too. Look, AB, thank you very much for that piece of advice. That was a pretty fun broadcast, but it's also quite informative as well. And look, for anyone who's young getting into it, great piece of advice.
Yeah, I don't think we should be in the dating and love advice space. We're probably too cynical for that. But our duty of care is to our clients and their money, and and as I say, more than anything, understanding the money game and understanding the risks around that, particularly in terms of your asset protection, I can't stress enough. And having this kind of conversation on the front end, sobering as it may be, it may act as a very good filter that stops you taking that next step if it's the wrong one anyway, or if it's the wrong person. At least you've had that sort of ability to cut it early and not dig yourself into a bigger hole.
There you go. Relationship advice from two cynics. Thanks very much, AB. Absolute pleasure. Great advice out there, and I'm sure our viewers will get plenty out of that.
Always a pleasure, Mitch. No problem.
Cheers.
So there you have it, guys. Make sure you give us a review and a rating, and make sure you keep your eyes open. Very serious area. Make sure you look after your money. Chat soon.